At Namzo 2 in the morning on October 23, 1944, a U.S. submarine commander looked through a periscope and saw the front edge of Japan's last great naval gamble. Not a symbol, not a legend, a silhouette. A Japanese heavy cruiser, massive and dark in the dawn haze, sliding through Palawan Passage with an empire behind her. Commander David Hayward McClintock did not know the ship was Atago. He did not know Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita was aboard. He did not know that the rooms behind that armored bridge were carrying the orders, radio traffic, charts, and command rhythm of the most powerful Japanese surface force still able to sail. He only knew one thing. The target was close, the angle was good, and the biggest battle fleet Japan had left was moving in a straight line through submarine water. 6 Mark 14 torpedoes left USS Darter's forward tube. For the men on Atago's bridge, the morning still looked controlled. Formation speed, course steady, destroyers screening, mission alive. Then the sea opened on the starboard side. One explosion, then another, then another. Steel ruptured below the waterline. Boiler rooms vanished into steam and flame. Electrical power failed. Telephones died in men's hands. The flagship that had been built to coordinate a fleet became, in minutes, a burning listing trap. Atago did not sink after a long battle. She did not die under a sky full of aircraft. She did not fall in a duel with another cruiser. She was hit before the main battle had even begun. And that is why Palawan Passage matters. Because those torpedoes did more than sink a ship. They broke the timing. They exposed the plan. They tore the brain out of Kurita's center force at the exact moment Japan needed that brain most. By late October 1944, Japan was not fighting for victory in the way it had imagined in 1941. That kind of victory was gone. The Marianas had fallen. Saipan was in American hands. Guam was back under American control. Tinian had become a forward base for the bombers that would soon reach the Japanese home islands. And the oil situation was worse than most maps could show. Japan had seized the southern resource zone because it needed fuel. Borneo, Sumatra, the Dutch East Indies. Tankers were supposed to carry that oil north and keep the combined fleet alive. But American submarines had been cutting those routes apart for years. Tankers went down, crews went down. Fuel that reached port was burned almost immediately. The great ships of the Imperial Japanese Navy still existed, but existence was not the same as freedom. A battleship without fuel was a monument. A cruiser without tankers was a weapon trapped in harbor. So Japan built one final operation around everything it had left. Operation Sho-Go, Victory Operation. The name sounded confident. The plan was not confidence. It was desperation wearing a uniform. American troops had landed at Leyte on October 20th. If Japan could reach the invasion anchorage, smash the transports, destroy the supply ships, and trap the landing force before it could settle in, maybe the American advance could be delayed. Maybe Washington would pay for every mile. Maybe Tokyo could still bargain from something other than ruin. That was the hope. The operation split Japanese naval power into multiple arms. A northern carrier force under Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa would act as bait. The carriers were nearly empty compared with the strike forces Japan had once sent across the Pacific, but they still looked like the prize Admiral Halsey wanted most. A southern force would force Surigao Strait, and the hammer the force meant to break through from the north was Vice Admiral Kurita's center force. Yamato, Musashi, Nagato, Kongo, Haruna, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, a column of steel large enough to terrify any transport fleet it reached. But first it had to pass Palawan. The Palawan Passage was a narrow road in the sea, deep water in the middle, reefs and shoals hemming ships into predictable lanes. A perfect place for submarines to wait. Kurita and his staff knew the danger. But Operation Sho-Go was a clockwork plan, and clockwork plans punish delay. If the center force arrived late, the other arms of the operation would strike at the wrong time. So the fleet drove on, fast enough to keep the schedule, straight enough to hold formation, predictable enough to make a submariner's hands steady. Below the surface of that coming disaster were 2 American submarines, USS Darter, USS Dace. They were not looking for history. They were running a patrol. That is the part stories often miss. The moments that later become enormous usually do not announce themselves. They arrive as routine work on a tired watch. At Modzo Masao in the morning, Darter's radar found contacts. Not one, not a small convoy. A spread of returns moving through the dark like a city at sea. McClintock understood immediately that this was not ordinary traffic. Darter sent contact reports. Dace joined the hunt. The 2 submarines had a problem. A submerged submarine could not simply chase down a fast surface fleet. To get ahead of Kurita, they had to surface, run on diesel engines through the night, and gamble that Japanese lookouts and radar would not find them first. 4 hours of pursuit, black water, diesel engines pounding, enemy destroyers somewhere in the dark, the Japanese fleet moving north, unaware that the element of surprise had already begun to bleed away. By dawn, Darter and Dace were ahead. McClintock brought Darter to periscope depth. The view in the lens was almost unbelievable. Pagoda masts, heavy cruisers, battleships, a war fleet filling the horizon. But a submarine attack is not a painting. It is math under pressure, bearing, range, speed, angle on the bow. Torpedo spread seconds. McClintock chose the lead cruiser. Inside Darter, men spoke quietly because quiet was the only kind of courage the boat could afford. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4, Fire 5, Fire 6. The torpedoes ran. Atago was still moving as if the sea belonged to her. Then the first warhead struck. The explosion ripped open her side forward of the bridge. More hits followed. Water and flame moved through compartments faster than orders could travel. Men tried to reach stations that no longer existed. Damage control parties fought steam, smoke, darkness, and a list that grew worse by the minute. Kurita was thrown into a disaster no admiral could command. A flagship is not only armor and guns. It is habit. It is staff. It is communication. It is the place where a force understands itself. When Atago began to die, Kurita did not just lose a ship. He lost the room from which the battle was supposed to be fought. Darter was not finished. After striking Atago, she damaged Takeo badly enough to send the cruiser limping away from the operation. Then Dace struck Maya, 4 torpedoes, another heavy cruiser gone. In less than one morning, before carrier aircraft had found the fleet, before Samar, before Surigao, before the famous argument over Halsey's movements, Kurita had lost his flagship, lost Maya, lost Takeo as an effective combat unit, and lost the clean beginning his operation required. Atago sank fast. Kurita survived. That fact mattered more than anyone could see in the moment. He was pulled from the water and later transferred to Yamato. Officially, the chain of command continued. The center force was still powerful. The mission was still possible. But command continuity is not the same thing as command confidence. A man who has been thrown from his flagship into burning water does not climb onto the next bridge as if nothing has happened. He brings the water with him. He brings the sound of dead telephones. He brings the knowledge that a force can look organized at sunrise and be leaderless before breakfast. And over the next 2 days, that memory would follow Kurita into every cloud of smoke. On October 24th, American aircraft found the center force in the Sibuyan Sea. Musashi became the center of the storm. Wave after wave of carrier aircraft came down on the giant battleship. Torpedoes slammed into her sides. Bombs tore into her decks. Anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with fire, but the attacks kept coming. Musashi was built to absorb punishment almost beyond imagination, and she did. Approximately 19 torpedoes, 17 bombs. Still, steel has limits. By evening, the second of Japan's 2 largest battleships was sinking, her bow low, her decks crowded with men watching the sea rise to meet them. Kurita turned away for a time. Then he turned back. Tokyo's orders were clear. Continue. So the battered center force moved toward San Bernardino Strait, and there the Japanese plan almost worked. Admiral Halsey had taken Ozawa's bait and gone north after the Japanese carriers. San Bernardino Strait was not guarded the way it should have been. Kurita passed through in darkness. By morning he was off Samar. Ahead of him were not fast fleet carriers, not a heavy battle line, not the main strength of the U.S. Third Fleet. Ahead of him was Taffy 3, 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts, small ships with big courage and almost no chance on paper. When Japanese lookouts saw the American ships, they misread them. At distance, through weather and haze, the little escort carriers looked more important than they were. Kurita believed he had found a major carrier force. He ordered a general attack. That order unleashed the guns of Yamato and the cruisers around her, but it also loosened the Japanese formation at the worst possible moment. Instead of a clean, coordinated strike toward Leyte Gulf, the center force became a chase through smoke, rain squalls, bad reports, and American desperation. And then the destroyers came. USS Johnston turned toward ships that outgunned her so completely the comparison almost loses meaning. Commander Ernest Evans did not wait for permission to do the impossible. He charged. Johnston laid smoke, fired guns, and launched torpedoes at close range. Hull and Heermann followed into the storm. Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort never designed for that kind of fight, joined the attack as if design no longer mattered. American aircraft came in with whatever they had: bombs, rockets, depth charges, machine guns. And when some pilots had no ordnance left, they made dry runs anyway, diving at Japanese ships to force turns and break aim. From the Japanese side, the picture became impossible. Smoke everywhere, shell splashes, reports of carriers, reports of torpedoes, ships maneuvering independently, cruisers damaged, destroyers scattered, aircraft diving again and again. And somewhere beneath all of it was Palawan, the unseen submarine, the sudden loss, the flagship gone before the battle began. Kurita's mind had already learned one brutal lesson in the last 48 hours. What looks like an opening can be an ambush. At around Chinzo Jaime that morning, he ordered his force to break off and turn north. This is the decision historians still argue over. Some call it caution, some call it confusion, some call it the failure that saved the Leyte invasion. But the simplest truth is more human and more frightening. Kurita reached the door. He had the power to push through it, and by the time he arrived, he no longer trusted what he was seeing on the other side. The transports at Leyte survived. The American landing force survived. Taffy 3 paid a terrible price, but it bought the hours that mattered. And the Japanese center force, the hammer of Operation Sho-Go, turned away from the target it had been created to destroy. North of the battle, Ozawa's carrier force was being sacrificed exactly as planned. At Surigao Strait, the southern force had been shattered in a night battle by American battleships and torpedoes. In the Sibuyan Sea, Musashi was gone. Off Samar, Kurita had turned back. Across 4 connected actions, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost the ability to contest the sea as a strategic force. There would still be ships, there would still be sailors, there would still be attacks. But the old dream of a decisive surface battle, the dream Japan had carried for decades, had drowned in pieces. And in the same waters another kind of war was beginning. On October 25th, the escort carrier USS St. Lo was struck by a Japanese suicide aircraft and sank after explosions tore through her. The kamikaze had moved from desperate idea to battlefield reality. That was not separate from Leyte Gulf. It was one of the conclusions Leyte forced. When conventional naval power could no longer deliver the result, Japan turned men into guidance systems. The sea battle ended. The moral horror deepened. Commander McClintock did not know all of that when he fired. No one ever knows the full size of a decision while making it. On Darter, the attack was a solution to a tactical problem. A target appeared. The firing angle opened. The torpedoes ran. Only afterward could anyone trace the line. From a radar contact after midnight, to a radio warning that stripped away surprise, to 6 torpedoes in the dawn, to a flagship sinking so quickly that an admiral had to be pulled from the water, to a command structure that never fully recovered its balance, to Musashi under air attack, to Taffy 3 charging into a battle it should not have survived, to Kurita turning north, to the end of Japan's navy as a force that could decide the war at sea. There is no need to make Palawan Passage larger than it was. It was not the whole Battle of Leyte Gulf. It was not the only reason Japan failed. Battles are never that clean. But it was the first crack in the final plan, and it struck the one place steel cannot armor well enough. Command. Atago went down in minutes. Maya followed. Takao turned away wounded. Kurita survived, but the operation he carried forward was no longer the operation that had left Brunei. The formation still had battleships. It still had guns. It still had orders. What it no longer had was the certainty with which it had entered the passage. That certainty is what Darter killed. The waters off Palawan are quiet now. No diesel engines on the surface. No periscopes slicing the dawn. No pagoda masts coming north in column. Only deep water over the place where a routine patrol became an event large enough to bend a campaign. McClintock did his job, his crew did theirs, Dace did hers. The rest was consequence, and sometimes that is how history moves. Not with a speech, not with a flag raised in triumph, but with a quiet command inside a steel tube under the sea. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, and an empire, already dying, loses the nerve to finish its last gamble.